Enki, one of the most powerful gods of Sumerian mythology, was born of the unexpected union between the god Anu and the goddess Namu. Although Anu had the goddess Ki as his consort, he maintained an impure relationship. Enki, as soon as he was born, became the god of wisdom, magic, and earth, and eventually ruled Eridu, and formed the triad of the great gods with the god Anu, his father, and with the god Enlil, his brother. For thousands of years, Enki's brother was the ruler of the universe and positioned himself as the supreme god of the entire cosmos. For he had in his possession the dreaded and coveted tablets of destiny. This artifact had the power to grant the power of absolute sovereignty to whoever possessed them. So, being in the power of Enlil, he became permanently the ruler of the entire universe. In the beginning, the lesser gods served the desires of the other gods. They worked hard to satisfy their superiors who did not care about the burden they carried. So they were always tired of all the hard work they did to keep creation and all the gods alive. As time went by, many gods became dissatisfied with the functions delegated to the lesser gods. So they started to create secret meetings where they exposed their complaints to build a plan to get rid of all the unbearable burdens that the superior gods put on them. Many gods began to join the cause, and in one of the meetings was born the idea of creating the descendant of the god, creating the man, so that at last they would be the ones to serve the gods. With that idea, the Igwigi went to all the temples of the superior gods, and small disturbances took place outside the temples, demanding that their claims be heard because they no longer wished to serve the gods since the jobs they performed were too difficult and they did not receive the due recognition. The god Enki heard what was murmured by the temples about the rebellion of the gods, but thought that it was not his business, because Enlil still did not call an assembly of gods, so he believed that it would soon dissipate. However, one day the lesser gods went in search of Enki, for they were desperate and wished to get his help, as they had been threatened with death by the great god Apsu, the god of fresh water. The little gods told Enki that while they were making their protests, one of the primordial gods became angry and went up to the surface in a great fury. He told them to return to their work immediately, and if they did not do so, they would be punished with the destruction of the world with his powerful waters. So he had recommended them to return to their work in silence. Thus, the lesser gods were terrified when they heard the words of the great god Apsu, for they knew that he was too strong and that not even among all of them were able to face the god, for they would not be able to defeat him. Thus, they decided to go in search of the god Enki, who was known to have the gift of helping others, so they thought that the wise god would help them without thinking, despite being one of the primordial gods and the brother of the ruler of the cosmos. Enki listened attentively to everything said by the Igwigi and agreed to help them because he knew very well that he could face any god. After all, their powers were similar, so Enki undertook a journey to the depths to find the god Apsu and put him in his place. As soon as he reached the depths of the great river where Apsu lived, he confronted him and a great battle broke out between the great gods. The spells of the god Enki trapped the god Apsu, and he fell deeply asleep because that spell had induced him to an eternal sleep from which he would never wake up, which made the god not intervene again in the revolts. Apsu would be a danger to the rebels, so the lesser gods dared to confront the assembly of gods at the gates of Enlil's temple when his death was confirmed. The lesser gods had gathered several great gods who supported them, and as expected Enki also joined, for he thought of helping his fellow gods, and despite being a great god, he desired the creation of a descendant and the equality of the gods in the cosmos. Thus, Enki was part of the gods who were in favor of the creation of man, and against his brother, encouraged them in their great rebellion, and gave them his full support to claim their rights with fury before the great god Enlil. However, the consort of the god Apsu would rise to fulfill her husband's wishes to destroy creation. Tiamat, wife of Apsu, goddess of salt water, went out to rebuke the lesser gods for their rebellion, and told them that if they did not return to their labors, they would be the cause of the destruction of the world, with them in it. Again, the servants of the cosmos were frightened, for their lives were at stake, and this time it was much worse, so they decided to seek the help of the god Enki, who offered them his absolute support. The Igwigi, fearful and very irritated, told Enki that Tiamat was going to destroy creation and that nothing could stop her. For her fury was uncontrollable, and she was so determined to destroy everything because of the rebellion of the servants, and above all, because of the spell Enki cast on her husband. Enki took pity and agreed to help them again, but the goddess was so furious that even he was not able to face the dreaded Tiamat because her power at that moment was enormous and unbridled. So, Enki sought the help of his brother Enlil. Even though he knew that he was against the requests of the lesser gods, he knew that he would not allow creation to be destroyed by Tiamat. So, he went to look for him in his temple, and told him, "Tiamat threatens to destroy creation and take the power of the cosmos. We need you to intervene to stop her fury." Enlil, looking at him fixedly, answered, "I will accept to help only if after doing so, I am recognized as the king of all the gods." Desperate Enki accepted the god's condition and immediately took him to Tiamat. The goddess Tiamat was out of control. Her anger was so great that among the gods anxiety was inevitable because Tiamat was very feared in their pantheon. Enlil came to confront the goddess, who immediately began to attack him. A great battle had been unleashed in the universe, as Tiamat claimed the life of her beloved husband and was determined to take the throne of Enlil. Enlil and Tiamat fought with great fervor, demonstrating their powerful gifts. However, Enlil was more cunning and swifter than the goddess, and in seconds he took his wind arrows and shot with fury into Tiamat's chest, killing her instantly. Thus, the great god Enlil had saved the world and his subjects. For a brief moment in the heavens celebrated the victory of Enlil, and was crowned king of all the gods, and eternal sovereign. However, the great problem of the office of the Igwigi remained, for they rejected the designs of Enlil to continue to maintain the order of the earth, and demanded the creation of man. For several years, Enlil ignored the protests of the Igwigi, for he did not agree with the creation of a descendant inferior to the gods and the Igwigi. However, the riots and disturbances at the door of his temple were uncontrollable, and every day there were more and more, so Enlil feared the fury of the Igwigi. But he sent to threaten them to continue working, and the lesser gods pleaded and called on the god Enki to save them. Because he had offered his protection and shelter, though they cried out with all their might, their groans were not heard by Enki. For he lay in heaven in a deep sleep. Enki was fast asleep, and the sleep that had gripped the god was so heavy that there was no way to wake him. Hearing the cries of despair of the Igwigi, Namu, Enki's mother, went to look for him to ask him to help the gods. As soon as she arrived at her son's chamber, she saw him lying there fast asleep. She tried to wake him up, but was unsuccessful, for Enki was unconscious. Namu did not give up, for the groans of the Igwigi were so great that he could not bear to listen to their pain. So as a last attempt he approached Enki's ear and whispered, "My son, wake up from your deep sleep and do the most sensible thing. Help the Igwigi to mold the descendants so that his crying will cease." When Namu got up to return to his palace, Enki began to move, and little by little he was waking up from his long lethargy because the words of his mother had resounded in the deepest part of his being, so he had the strength to get up. So, Enki ran to look for the Igwigi to advise them on what they should do to finally obtain their freedom. Enki took the leadership of the lesser gods and told them that they should be strong because now the riots and protests should be more threatening, so that in this way Enlil would feel intimidated and would have no other way out but to accede to their requests. Every day the disturbances were greater, and the great gods began to feel annoyed by the great uproar that the Igwigi were making, so that every day the claims to the god Enlil were more frequent and alarming. So, the king felt cornered in this way, decided to gather all the gods and reach an agreement to solve the problem. Enki was totally in agreement with the proposal of the minor gods, so in the meeting of the great gods he convinced everyone, including Enlil, to create the servants of the gods, because he said that this way, they would no longer worry about future revolts that destabilize the universe, and above all the hard work to maintain the creation. Enlil accepted the proposal of his brother Enki, and told him to be the one in charge of the creation of man in the image and likeness of the gods. Enki, together with other gods, began to plan the origin of the new servants, and so Enki said that the new descendant should be made of fertile clay of the Apsu, mixed with blood. All agreed. The lesser gods were excited and felt triumphant with the new servants of the cosmos, and proposed that the god Kingu, second consort of Tiamat, be sacrificed so that his blood would be used to mold man. Enki was undecided about the proposal of the Igwigi because he did not agree with sacrificing Kingu. However, the lesser gods ended up convincing Enki that offering Kingu was the best option for the arrival of the new descendants. Enki began to work to give life to the first humans. Together with the goddesses, Namu and Ninmah began to mold the first man who after being formed came to life, and they called him Adapa. Then the goddess Ninmah took the human and assigned him tasks because they had agreed that each human would have a destiny and a specific task on earth, and so they sent him to start working. Thus, they continued with several more humans, and they saw how immediately the new servants of the gods worked regardless of anything. They only obeyed their orders. In this way, the gods who intervened in the creation of the new servants celebrated their success with great banquets and lots of alcohol. While they were molding the humans, they drank beer non-stop and ended up getting drunk, as they could not even stay awake anymore. However, in the middle of the party, Enki proposed to Ninmah to continue sculpting the servants, but this time they would be with a condition as a game. The god told Ninmah that one should create more human beings, while the other should assign the tasks and their destiny, and so whoever is wrong first must comply with a punishment. Ninmah, totally drunk, accepted the challenge and told him, "I assure you that the shape of the body of the man I make will decide his destiny. If he has a good body, his destiny will be good, but if he has a bad body, it will certainly be a bad destiny." Hearing the thought of the goddess, Enki replies, "I will counteract the destiny that according to you bestow upon him, by shaping his body, and I will give them relevance." Thus, Ninmah took the mixture of clay and blood that Enki had prepared and began to mold deformed and hideous humans. Many bodies were incomplete, and their physical deficiencies were shocking. Ninmah, in the hope that Enki would err, smiled every time he molded the deformed men. However, to his surprise, as soon as he delivered the humans with the hideous body to Enki, the god took them with serenity and joy. Enki began to assign tasks to each of the deformed humans that Ninmah had sculpted and gave them a position with great relevance and importance, with great gifts that would excel on earth, and thus make them successful. The god found a task for each of the men, for although they were incomplete, he found a specific mission that they could fulfill. "I took your deformed ones and gave them what to earn their bread with, so I found them a good destiny. It is your turn now," said Enki, looking firmly at Ninmah. Enki took the divine mixture of clay to mold several incomplete and deformed human beings. He grouped them, and as soon as he finished, he gave them one by one to the goddess Ninmah so that she could assign them a job. It was very difficult for Ninmah to determine the tasks of the bad-bodied men, for she thought that their fate must be as bad as their appearance. Nevertheless, she succeeded in assigning the tasks just as Enki had done. Thus, the god Enki took the last human he had created and gave him to the goddess Ninmah. This last man was very small, and could not fend for himself, for he did not speak, did not walk, and did his needs on himself. As soon as Ninmah saw him, she did not know what to do. She did not know what activities she should give to that little creature. Hours and hours passed, and the goddess could not think of the tasks of that little man, so without more to do she gave up. She told Enki that she could not assign his destiny to the little servant, because he was too useless and small, so she preferred to receive the penance. So, Enki told Ninmah that, as penance of the game, she should take the servant and be the one to take care of him and teach him to be equal to the gods. Ninmah with disgust accepted Enki's decision because, in the beginning, she had accepted all the rules of the game. The goddess took the deformed human to her palace and nursed and raised him as a son, so this creature would become the first human baby on earth, for until then all servants were made in the adult image and likeness of the gods. Time passed, and the new workers of the gods tired quickly in the fields, so Enki and Ninmah had to mold more and more humans. But for the gods the work was too exhausting, so one day they thought of a way in which they would no longer have to sculpt clay, for now, the new humans would be endowed with the ability to multiply so that their population would constantly grow. Enki supposed that the idea of the humans being the ones to decide about the population seemed very good to him, for he no longer had to mold the new inhabitants. Many years passed, and the inhabitants on Earth had increased exorbitantly. The noise of the human population was so loud that it was assimilated to a dreadful dismal din, which never ceased. Enlil noticed the terrible noise that was born from the earth and began to be enraged, because at night, when he was ready to rest and sleep, he could not fall asleep, because the noise was tremendous that woke up the god constantly during the night. Enlil had warned the other gods about the uproar on earth and said that he would not allow men to ruin his rest, and that if the noise continued, he would exterminate the humans. Enlil, as king of the gods, had the power to command and influence them. But the other gods this time agreed with his designs and complaints, for they too were too annoyed with the noise of the humans, so everyone in the assembly of gods supported Enlil. Enki, on the other hand, did not agree with his brother's decision, so he kept a close eye on the future decisions his Enlil would make. Enlil's warning was ignored, the noises and disturbances on earth continued, and the king of the gods still could not rest, so full of fury, he ordered to send to earth a great plague that would wipe out all humans. The plague reached the earth, and no one could escape the cruel punishment of the god, and thousands of people died every hour. The cries of pain were heartbreaking because the suffering on earth was tenacious. Atrahasis, a wise man, pleaded with great force to the god Enki to help him save humanity from the fateful Sarupa that was scourging the earth. Enki did not hesitate to help the nobleman, because he proved to be a just and pure man. Moreover, Enki wished to end the reign of his brother Enlil, for he was filled with envy for Enlil's place in the universe. So, Enki advised Atrahasis what he should do to save himself and thus end the plague on the earth. Atrahasis should tell his people that all the prayers they make should be directed to Namtar, god of plagues, and that he would be ashamed and lift the plague. As Enki said, in a short time the pestilence on earth ended. However, thousands of humans had died, the earth was almost inert, and their murmurs were silent in the heavens. So Enlil, seeing what his brother did, said nothing because he was already able to fall asleep. With time, history repeated itself, and Enlil, full of fury, decided to exterminate humanity definitively because the noise of men on earth was deafening. The din was so terrible that he could not even be in peace in his palace. This time, without consulting anyone, he went to the god Adad, god of storms and rains, and ordered him to withdraw the rains from the face of the earth so that drought and famine would be the cause of death of human beings. This time Enlil was happy, because he was very aware of what was happening on earth. Thousands of people were dying of hunger, droughts were devastating and ended with everything in their path, very few men were left on earth. So Enlil thought that finally, his plan had worked. In the carelessness of his brother Enlil, Atrahasis went again to Enki for help, and the god recommended him to do the same as in the past, and mankind would be saved. Again, Enki saved mankind against his brother, and just as in the past, the deaths ceased and Enlil was able to rest in the heavens, for the noise of men was no longer heard. But when only about 1,000 years had passed, again the noise of humanity bothered Enlil, and this time his fury was terrible because the noise was worse than ever. The uproar of men was uncontrollable. So, this time Enlil was determined to put an end to humanity, and this time he would not let anyone stand in the way of his designs to find peace. So he summoned all the gods in his temple to inform them of his new decisions. Once the assembly of the gods heard the god's angry words, they had no choice but to comply with his orders. Enlil told all the gods that he would deprive humans of all sources of life so that they would finally become extinct, and he designated a part of the earth to a specific god to be its guardian, and thus not allow men to reach its resources. In this way, Enlil told the god Anu and the god Adad to guard the heavens, and not to allow the rains to touch the earth. Enki was told that he should be the guardian of the water and should do the same as Anu and Adad, and finally, he said that he would be the one to guard the earth with fury. At that moment, the gods took their place ordered by Enlil, and began to deprive men of the gifts of nature. Enki was furious at his brother's actions, and in secret from Enlil, before the great catastrophe reached the earth, Enki went to Atrahasis to tell him what was about to happen, and told him to save many provisions for the hard years to come. Enlil from his throne verified that the other gods did their work, and were waiting for the men to disappear forever. A couple of years passed, and finally the deaths came to the creation. The famine was fatal and the suffering took over the earth. Because not even Enki could help, because Enlil was very aware of all his actions. However, in an oversight of the god, While resting, Enki sent a lot of fish so that men could survive, helped them to get food and water, and thus not die. For a while, the deaths ceased and men had increased their number, so Enlil was very confused because it was time for humanity to become extinct. Very worried and angry, was secretly supervised each of the gods to see who was the one who was failing to his authority and helping people. When Enlil discreetly looked out, he saw that Anu and Adad were carrying out his orders to the full, so he immediately discarded them. While when he looked out to verify the work of his brother Enki, he saw how he was sending provisions to the population to calm their hunger and suffering. So, he immediately exploded with fury and threw himself on his brother to confront him for the grave fault he had committed. Enki tried to defend himself. However, Enlil's anger was devastating, so he accepted his faults towards Enlil. Enlil's anger was uncontrollable, for what he wanted most was to end the dreadful noise of the humans, and his brother had disobeyed him, so Enlil told Enki that for his rebellion he had to fulfill a terrible punishment. Enlil said to Enki, "You will be the one who will finish with the humans, this time with your own hands. You will unleash on the earth a great flood that will finish with everything alive in the world, and at last I will have peace," said Enlil. Enki, trembling, received his punishment with disgust. But before sending the great flood upon the earth, he sought out Atrahasis to warn him of all that would happen to mankind. "You will build a great boat where you will keep a lot of food, and you will bring up beasts because you will be the one who will mark a new beginning in humanity. In a short time, a great flood will be unleashed on the earth that will finish with all living things, and therefore you must do what I tell you so that you can save mankind," said Enki to Atrahasis. Atrahasis went to his wife, told her everything that the god Enki had told him, and immediately began to build the ship that would save them from the great divine punishment. Atrahasis saved as much food as he could, and prepared to wait for the great flood. In the heavens, Enlil gave the order to his brother Enki to release the waters, and so in a short time the great flood swept away everything. Enlil was satisfied with what had happened and decided to go and feast in the temple with a great feast. The days passed, and Enlil looked out over the land to see how the flood was descending, and as soon as it appeared he saw a boat sailing the wild waters. He approached to take a closer look to be sure of what it was, and as soon as he was there, he saw how Atrahasis and his wife were alive. Immediately the fury seized the king, and in seconds he went in search of his brother, for Enki was the only god who could have helped men. Enlil challenged his brother, but he tried to calm him down, shouting that he had a plan that guaranteed his peace as long as Atrahasis and his wife survived. After so much struggle between the great gods, Enki managed to convince his brother, and so they began to plan the strategy that marked a new beginning for humanity. Thus, all the gods dictated that Atrahasis and his wife would be the parents of the new advent of humanity, as they proved to be pure and noble people. So the gods gave immortality to Atrahasis and his wife, for being the only survivors. Enlil, on his part, immediately thought of a way in which men would not multiply as the last time, for he wished to have peace, and this time he would make sure that humanity would be controlled. So he dictated that a third of the women and men descendants would be sterile so that the stragglers would continue serving the gods for eternity. A new beginning had been marked in creation, but this time the gods would make sure that humans would not generate so many conflicts that would disturb their tranquility.